There are, as I mentioned, there are genetic forms of ALS. So there are, let's say, half a dozen to a dozen genes where mutations in these genes will cause ALS or are very likely to cause ALS. And these genes several of them are being very actively explored as targets for therapies. So one of the recently approved drugs is against a gene called SOD1, and this is a program that Biogen led, Biogen and Ionis, I think. And the SOD1 gene has a so-called gain of negative function. So the gene in people who get SOD1-related ALS, the gene it has a mutation that causes bad things unrelated to its normal function. And the therapy is simply to prevent that bad gene from being expressed as a protein. Okay, so it blocks the effect of that gene. And that therapy was approved by the FDA, and it's interesting. It was such a transformative therapy that it was approved even though the clinical benefit is probably not great yet in terms of outcomes. But the fact that they could show they could remove this gene, they could target it, and they could do what they needed to do molecularly was enough. And I mention that as a story because that shows you that the field is on the march. And for many of these genes, I think there will be some success in mitigating the terrible outcome of ALS. And it probably will, it'll take some time. And you see this with Alzheimer's disease as well. The first therapies, they didn't really work. They were controversial. Now it seems like they're starting to work. And so that, I expect that momentum to continue. It's a natural question to think, okay, if you develop a therapy for a genetic subset of ALS patients, is it only going to work for those patients? And those are things we have to learn. I mean, you could argue this both ways. It might be that some of these targets will be effective for a larger fraction of the patient populations, not just those who have the bad genetic form, but that has to be established. So I think there's real cause for hope, and there's a lot of really specific and I think very precise, incisive paths that are being explored.